We called them fallen angels. They were strung up by their ankles and suspended from trees. There was always barbed wire, wrapped all around the body, sliced the skin and ripped the tissue, and it was worse if they struggled. Ideally, they would die of dehydration, but this mercy was extended to only a fortunate few. Most of the time, they would dangle from the branches for hours as the barbs tore their flesh and the pressure built under their heads. When upright, the heart doesn't have to pump blood that hard to circulate through the brain. Gravity does most of the work so it can get back down. Consequently, the blood vessels up there are smaller and thinner than the rest of the body. I'd rather be hung, personally. I would much prefer the struggle for breath and kicking the air and the white-hot agony of my vertebrae coming apart than waiting for my blood to pool in my head, clot, and eventually burst the veins and feel the warm, sticky liquid drip out of my eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. A noose would be kinder, and suffocation gentler. There's something in here, my brother would tell me from the porch, pointing his cigarette toward the tree. It watches people, then strings up the ones it doesn't like. As paranoid as he was, I agreed with him. He spent a lot of time on that porch. I don't let him smoke in the house. He sat out there, cigarette in one hand, gun in the other, just watching the woods and waiting for something to come out. One night, I heard him yelling, frantically to get my attention. Gunshot after gunshot exploded through the air and intermingled with his crazed screaming. I ran out to the porch to find my brother in a panic that was slowly turning to rage. Guns don't do anything. I saw them. Their eyes were just peering out from the trees, watching me. They almost glowed. Emphatically pointed towards the woods behind our house, trying to show me the eyes that weren't there. That's not reason to wake up the entire neighborhood. My brother had this habit of keeping his cigarette between his teeth when he talked. It didn't matter how important what he said was. The only thing I could see, the glowing in the end of the cigarette, bobbing up and down as the words fell out. It was infuriating, and it was one of those trivial things that finds its way under your skin and stays there, tapping at the inside of your skull. I had expressed my displeasure several times, but he didn't seem to care much. I must have been giving him a look this time, because he yanked the cigarette out of his mouth and let it limply dangle in his fingers. I will not be strung up in these woods. He spit his final words at me before stomping out his remaining half-cigarette and storming inside. I wasn't worried that the neighbors would call the police. They knew my brother, and they knew the woods. It was amazing, the things you could get away with in this town. Everyone here was afraid. But more than that, they were constantly on edge, as if their whole body seethed with anticipation. The paranoia was so ingrained in this people that it could only be born out of desperation. It seemed that they had tried everything. Guns, knives, brute force. Heck, one time someone tried to light the whole woods on fire. The kids played in the streets, or preferably, if they had friends live in the next subdivision, in the backyard of the next neighborhood over. When they grabbed their flashlights in the middle of the night, they would tell stories about the woods. They never talked about Bloody Mary or Slender Man because in Fairdale, the real horror lived 10 feet behind their homes. I don't think anyone in the town had seen such creatures, but we all knew what they looked like. The descriptions were spread around in passing whispers and hushed voices, out of the fear that they were listening. All the children spoke softly but empathetically about their gray skin, 6-inch fingers, and hollow, infinite sockets carved deep into their skulls. They seemed almost human, and maybe they once were. Once, that I can remember, a kid went into the forest. A bunch of others dared him to. They waited in the shadows between houses, hearts pounding even though they weren't the ones going in. In silence, they watched him glare back, hoping that they would call the whole thing off and reluctantly submerge himself into the trees. There was a snapping of twigs and then, abruptly, stillness. The group did not take their eyes off the woods, yet they could see the fear among their friends. They waited for a minute, surprisingly more cautiously taking a few steps backward, then turning and sprinting away. the boy was gone. The very next day, a group of police officers, most of whom resigned that day, were sent in after him. Let me tell you, he struggled. The wires tore through the skin of his abdomen, leaving the internal organs to spill out and hanging from his body. After that day, no children went in the woods. They didn't even have to be told not to. After the paper ran that story, Fairdale lost its mind. Sure, bodies turned up every other week, but it was never a child. That kind of death was somehow more than murder. It was a disaster. A tragedy. I lived right on the edge of these woods. That the incident stuck with me. It somehow made the whole thing real. And these things were right behind my house. My last night in Fairdale was hopefully the worst of my life. My brother was outside smoking, and I was the one on the couch, mostly asleep. I'm not a heavy sleeper, so I was glad when the small noises around me seemed to quiet down. But just as I was about to drift off, my brother fired that dang gun around 3,000 times, ran inside and slammed the door behind him. His cigarette, still lit, clamped fiercely between his teeth. I shot up, dazed and unsure of what was happening. Hands trembling, my brother ran to all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. What the heck, man? I rubbed my eyes, wishing I was asleep. He sat on the coffee table inches away from me, voice raspy and frightened. I saw them. They came out. His eyes were crazed. His mouth was running faster than his head. He inadvertently blew his smoke from his lips, and every word rushed with forced breath. I didn't even know you could see them. My mouth opened, but before I could speak, I heard something tapping on the sliding glass door. My jaw hung ajar, and my brother and I froze instinctively. It was too soft to be a knock, but too hard to be the wind. A moment later, it came again. They're coming to get me, my brother whispered. His eyes were wild, darting across the room as if he was afraid to leave them in one place for too long. They don't like me. Are you sure you saw them? My voice was barely audible. Somehow, I knew that they could hear me anyways. I first noticed out of the corner of my eye. Just one of them at first, but more came. Tap, tap, tap. Tall. My God, they were tall. Until they started moving. I thought they were the trees, their arms hanging at their sides and as gangly as branches. What gave them away was the skin. Looked just like ash. Tap, tap, tap. While the sound did not increase in volume, they came to new places. I heard them still from the door. But now they were also at the windows, the sides of the house, and most disturbingly, the roof. They don't have faces. I mean, they've got eyes, but not really. They've just got these holes. My brother made circles with his pointer finger and thumb and held them over his own eyes. And the holes had this black coming out of them, just dripping down their heads. I think they could have been human, if they wanted to be. Tap, tap, tap. My palms were clammy, and I broke out into a cold sweat. I could picture their long, bony fingers rapping on the house, their gnawed eyes inches from the window, waiting for us to draw back the curtain and meet their gaze. Until that moment, I don't think I have ever been truly afraid. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed all around us. We knew we couldn't leave. Even if we called someone, what good would it do? I don't think that anything could save us. Our only option was to wait and hope that we have not received a death sentence. Tap, tap, tap. I could hear it coming from beneath the house. These things were everywhere. It scared me knowing that they didn't just burst in, that they were waiting for something. It scared me even more that I didn't know what. And I couldn't really do anything but wait. This isn't how I wanted to die. My brother and I sat on the floor between the couch and the coffee table and hoped it all would end. "What do you think they are?" I asked. We all heard the stories, but these creatures had no name. They simply existed. They were always here, and we did everything we could to leave them alone, to live without them, and for the most part, they let us. They took some people, I suppose, to make an example. It was a constant reminder of the fear, and maybe it kept this town in line. My brother's head was bowed, and his eyes would not meet mine. He lit his fourth cigarette of the night, taking a long drag and holding it deep in his lungs before releasing it. With his eyes still fixed at the floor, he said the only words that had ever struck a real fear into my core. "Jimmy, I think they're God." I could only hear the tapping and feel them staring at me from all directions. Despite the emptiness of the house, we knew what they were, in some way, both inside and out. I forced my eyes shut, and in the darkness I was only able to picture their elongated limbs hanging at their sides, their shoulders hunched to fit our low ceilings. God, I could feel the inky ooze dripping into my hair. I refused to open my eyes because if I did, they might have been there. If they remained closed, it was easier to pretend. Tap, tap, tap. My brother promised me that he would stay awake all night. He swore. Grabbing a pillow from the couch, he handed it to me and insisted that I slept. I argued, but I was so tired. Eventually I did fall asleep, albeit against my will. Tap, tap, tap. It had to be noon when I woke. I was alone. I checked the whole house, and even mustered up the nerve to step on the porch. But I was alone. Dead or alive, I had to find my brother. I went into the woods, and I think that was the biggest screw-up of my entire life. After a deep breath, I stepped into the tree line. The sun was high in the afternoon sky, but it was impossibly dark inside the forest, and even more unbelievably silent. I was the only thing that disturbed the stillness. I'll be honest here and say that I didn't have a plan. I had no idea where to look for my brother, and I didn't even know how I would react if I found him in the branches. When I stopped in a small clearing to look around, the blurs at the corner of my vision began to move. I knew what it was. I froze. And I think that even my heart stopped beating. Maybe they wouldn't see me. Maybe they'd leave. Maybe I was losing my mind. They got closer to me, close enough to see. If they didn't move, they could be the trees. But if they did, they were something that shouldn't have been allowed to exist. I shut my eyes and ran blindly into the forest, through the trees, scraping my arms on low-hanging branches. Miraculously, I made it out. I didn't stop running until I threw myself in the car. I sped down the highway and checked up into a motel. Though it took me an extra hour to fall asleep that night, I kept the TV turned up, just in case they came tapping. I never saw my brother, or Fairdale again. I am no genius, but I knew when to get the heck out of that town. I moved to a new state, this time making sure I lived in the city, away from the woods. Even though years and miles have passed since that night, every so often I hear the tapping again. With the knowledge that I can never escape my hometown, I am left with nothing else to do but wait until it's my turn and hope I dehydrate.